The first topic is do people have to be a certain type? Or must they have a certain software? To be able to understand philosophy. The next is guilt. That's the other topic. And the next is art. For those of you who came in late, let me just give you some background. Our good friend who came to pay us a visit and brought some food is teaching at San Francisco State, and they're covering a book called The Strange Life of Ivan Osokin by P.D. Auspinsky, a Russian who was a student for almost a decade, to G.I. Gurdjieff, who was Armenian, I think, or something. And she said that there was a young female student who became enormously interested in the book and in Kendra's interpretation of some of the passages in the book. And so one day after class, she goes to her and says, I really like the way you interpreted this particular passage. I'd like to come by and have a conversation. And then I asked, what is she? Not who is she, but what is she? And someone suggested that that question is borderline racist.
No.
I was just kidding. I'm just putting words in your mouth because it makes our conversation a bit more seasoned.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I know.
Because I think that everyone knows.
So to perhaps explain why it's important to ask what is she, I'm going to go back to a movie that came out some maybe, 20 years ago. It's called The Last Samurai. And I think if you're able to kind of talk about the movie in the proper way, we can talk about guilt and we can also talk about art. Yes, it's about Tom Cruise. So what you have initially, of course, we don't really know the background of the story except that Tom Cruise has these nightmares. You're talking about a young man who perhaps signed up to go into the military to make some money, maybe because he didn't really have a father. And the military was perhaps a chance for him to experience what authority is. And for him, the military is you serve a brotherhood, you serve your country. It's because the brotherhood cares for you, the country cares for you, they love you, they push you, impose things upon you because it's good for you. So it becomes a replacement for a father you didn't have, or stability you didn't have, or discipline you didn't have. You're also dealing with someone who doesn't really have a core or a foundation or a backbone, in the sense that since you lack experience and since you lack reflection upon the experiences that life gives you, You have a tendency of following orders. You have a tendency of conforming, and there are many reasons for that. When you conform or when you obey, you actually belong to a circle. You don't ask questions, you don't examine, you simply say yes. It gives you meaning, it gives you purpose. You belong to a community, and it's a nice feeling that there are people who care for you, you care for them, you're not isolated, you're not lonely, you're not an outcast. You know, that's one of the things that people often say when they join gangs, that their mom didn't understand them, their dad didn't understand them, perhaps they didn't have parents. And because they didn't have parents and they had a lot of negative emotions, they joined other people who, similar to them, had negative emotions. And now there's a brotherhood. And in this brotherhood, you're willing to sacrifice your life, your time, your energy. Now, what Tom Cruise didn't know in this, when he enlisted in the military, was that he's going to go into the battlefield. And because he likes his captain, and he looks at the captain symbolically as a father figure, perhaps. And because when you enlist, you can't but say yes all the time. His captain says to him, well, you see those people over there? We call them Native Americans. It's something we talked about in this class. They're not civilized, they're not barbarians, they're savages. They don't need to occupy this land. You need to get rid of them. And you find yourself at a crossroad. Do you say yes or do you say no? If your captain is able to sell you this story as to what kind of savages you're dealing with, if he can package that particular piece of advertisement in a relatively nice way, then you have no choice but to believe what's being presented to you. And then when you look at a red man, you see nothing but savage. You see nothing but waste. And then it's not going to be a problem for you to get rid of him, because that piece of advertisement will brainwash you or impose itself upon you into seeing this man not so much as a human being, as something that's just walking around, has no feelings, no history, no connection to the land. And the moment you dehumanize someone, it's really, really easy to kind of just not think about them, not feel about them, and just get rid of them. If, on the other hand, there is something about you that resists, that says yes at 9 o'clock, and then says why at 10, and says no at 11, and then again says maybe at 12, what you have is a man or a woman who lives in conflict. Should I stay? Should I go? Should I kill? Should I let go? And so what you have in the movie is a young man, again, probably has no parents, goes into the military, obeys, and because he wants to be liked, because he doesn't want to lose his place in this particular community, he does as his captain says, which is go out there and kill people. Now, all of us in this class do things. We just have no idea the consequences of those actions upon our physical body, psychological body, emotional body. Forget the spirit, because none of us in this class have a soul just yet. So, he goes into the battlefield, and there are some soldiers that he kills. But there are also these old men and old women who can hardly walk, and he has no problem shooting them down. And there are also children who are just playing around, having a good time, and he kills them as well. You know, when you're engaged in something and that engagement happens to be quite intense, it just consumes you. You don't think about what you're doing. There is no shame, there is no remorse, there are no guilt taking place inside you, because these are things that happen to you after your engagement is over. You know, it's like you promise yourself to be on a diet. You promise yourself not to smoke. You promise yourself not to drink. But something happens where you find yourself drinking or smoking or just eating a lot of hamburgers. And then you sit somewhere and things are quiet down now. Your desires have been satisfied and you say, damn, I broke my promise. I was to be on a diet, but I changed my mind for that particular moment. I promised myself not to drink, and here I am drinking. Promised not to smoke, promised not to be angry. So remember, when you're engaged in something and that engagement is interesting enough, exciting enough, inspiring enough to consume you, your reflection basically goes on pause. It doesn't work. So time passes for Tom Cruise in this movie, The Last Samurai. He's no longer in the military. He served his time. He's now a civilian. He can no longer sleep. He is haunted by these images, people walking around, and he shot them. Children having fun, he shot them. And upon reflection, I suppose he can't believe, the sort of things that he had done. And there is no way that anyone can go back in time and fix things. And especially if you have done a lot of awful things in your life, it's really, really difficult. The moment you think upon what you have done, you begin to examine, you begin to reflect, because this dam that kept your emotions, very, very removed from you, the dam breaks and all of a sudden you're under an avalanche of emotions. You're ashamed, you feel crappy, you have nightmares, you feel guilty. And the problem with having these emotions, which are really, really, really good emotions, by the way, the only problem is you need to really have tools to be able to cope with these emotions when they come to you. Tom Cruise becomes, I suppose, a symbol of just a common white American, young, goes into the military, he's a yes man, he has no idea what he's doing, but he does it nevertheless, and then he pays the price afterwards. He has all these emotions, but because he comes from a very young culture, he comes from a very superficial culture, and by that I mean a culture that hasn't been around for too long. Because if your culture has been around like Africa, 5, 6, 7,000 years, you've been in enough wars, you've seen enough dead people, you have experienced a good amount of earthquakes, famine, disasters, where your culture begins to create narratives, stories that eventually will become part of every human psyche in, say, Africa, in Mexico, in India, in Middle East, that should someone die, there are rituals. Should you hear that you have cancer, you have a certain perspective about life and death. It's not going to crush you, And so when a culture is young and you don't have the proper stories, what happens is you have a tsunami of all these negative emotions: shame, embarrassment, guilt, remorse. And they are disturbing, they are painful, but you have no tools. So what do you do? In the movie, Tom Cruise begins to drink. Not just a glass here or a bottle there. He goes to 7-Eleven, or maybe Costco, it's cheaper. He buys 48 cans in a tiny little box. Okay. He buys 10 boxes, which is about 400 cans of beer. And he goes home and he drinks all the beers. Why? That's the only way you can forget. So when a culture is young, how do you forget all the problems that life imposes upon you? Well, you drink, you smoke, you build shopping malls, and you do retail therapy. You know. You create artists who are really not artists at all. Now, what happens when you are drunk on a daily basis? You don't drink because you're forgotten. You drink because you remember what you have done. And that makes you feel so guilty. So remember, you feel guilty when you remember some of the horrifying things you have done. Some of the promises you have broken to yourself, perhaps to other people. And when you're drunk on a daily basis, it becomes an addiction. And you know full well it's an addiction. You lose your self-respect. You lose dignity. If you had any intelligence about you, it goes out the window. Once in a while, it comes to pay you a visit, only to make you feel really bad about yourself, what you've become, who you've become. And your life just lacks meaning and purpose. And all of a sudden comes in this Messiah, his captain, looks at him and says, your life is a waste. Very much like the magician in the story of Osakin. Why not give it to me? In Japan, there is a group of people, a community, that every time the government wants to sleep with the West, when Japan wants to sleep with America, when the officials want to sleep with the English, to bring in the railroads, to bring in this, to bring in that, this particular community of samurais, and they have an ancient tradition, they come in and destroy everything. We need the samurais to be destroyed so that we can bring the goods from the West. So we can begin to wear, suits and ties. So that our music can resemble those of Eminem's. Now remember, if you're a drunk, and if your life lacks meaning and purpose, and if you have a very, very low self-esteem, almost anyone out there who can advertise anything to you relatively well, they will be able to deceive you very, very easily. And Tom Cruise, despite his resistance, eventually says yes. He goes back into being a soldier. He no longer drinks. He wakes up now and there is a purpose. And let me tell you how you and I find purpose in our life. For the longest time in human history, the villain wasn't your mom, it wasn't your dad, it wasn't your culture, it was Satan. There is no one to blame. You pray to God and you blame Satan for all the awful things in your life. Then slowly our cultures changed, you see. When we became a bit more secular, God went out the window, and with the absence of God, there is really no Satan. And so what you have is the guilt inside you. Now you have people like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, Eckhart Tolle, and the rest of these losers who come and say the real Satan really lives inside you. You need therapy. So if the villain at one point in our history was Satan, and the only way you could get rid of Satan was attaching yourself to God, and the only way you can attach yourself to God was to either join a monastery or to read the Bible or to go to church every single day. Tom Cruise didn't have a Satan out there, he had a Satan within him. All the awful things he had done. And the only way he could remove himself from the nightmare of how an awful human being he is, now he was on the battlefield. Not so much killing the red man anymore, he was now killing samurais. And he was now training Japanese soldiers how to combat the samurai clan. And so one day he wakes up and his captain comes and says, tomorrow we're going to attack them. Tom Cruise says, we're not ready. We're going to attack them. And the yes man that he has always been, he doesn't really put up much of a fight. He says, okay. They attack, they lose, Tom Cruise gets captured. And now the question, what is he? The samurais are a cult. They live with strict discipline. They have rituals. There's a hierarchy. It's not equality. Everybody knows where they belong. Kids don't walk around assuming to be adults. Women don't walk around assuming to be men. Farmers don't walk around assuming to be soldiers. Hierarchy. Now, the leader of the samurai cult has a dream before actually going into the battle and before capturing Tom Cruise. And the dream is, there is a man on the battlefield. He kills one of your senior soldiers. He puts up a really, really good fight, but eventually he gets captured. And as on the battlefield, he's on his horse, sitting back and watching how this battle is unfolding, Tom Cruise behaves in the same fashion that he saw in his dreams. He knows exactly how things are going to unfold. Now, if you have come from a culture again that is ancient, that is rich with tradition and ritual and psychological religious narratives, you can't dismiss dreams easily. They have significance, they have meaning. This is a bit of a digression, but it's okay. Life is a waste. A footnote here, a footnote there, wouldn't hurt anyone. Sometimes during waking hours, you want to do something. Let's say you want to drink. But there is something about you that resists. But the temptation is there. And there's a great amount of struggle, interior, inner struggle. Should I drink? Should I not drink? But it just consumes so much of your brain space that you can't focus on too many things. You just want to drink, but you don't. You have enough will. And then the exhaustion that comes upon you because of the struggle You kind of just lay on the sofa and you just sleep, pass out. And you have a dream where you are in Lakeshore. If I remember correctly, from 20 years ago, there is a bar there. It's called, I don't know, Easy Bar or something. And then in the dream, you see yourself sitting in a booth, and there is great-looking waitress coming your way, asking if you want vodka, or cognac, or beer, or this or that. And you say, yes, bring all of them. And in the dream, you're enjoying all the liquor that's brought to you. And you're drunk. Man, it's fun. And you wake up and you say, what the hell was that dream about? Well, when you have a desire that has consumed you for 10, 15, 20 hours a day, it's a problem, especially if the desire remains unsatisfied within you for a while. Somehow your body needs to release this pressure. How do you do it? The mind is imaginative enough, creative enough, where it says the only way I can release, this person's body, mind, emotion, soul from the desire of wanting liquor, I'll just create a dream. And you have a dream. In the dream, you drink, you get drunk, you have a good time, you wake up, and you no longer think about getting drunk. This dream has not come to you from God. It hasn't come to you from reading the Bible. It's something that has occupied your mental space, and it has had direct relationship with you as a human being and something that your senses have brought to your attention. I want to drink. And in Persian, we call this ru'yaya illat. It's caused. It's caused by your interaction with the physical world and all the difficulties it creates. And somehow it needs to be resolved. There is also this other aspect to dreams. You think of yourself being something that you're actually not. It's like you're 4 feet 2 inches tall and you think yourself to be LeBron James. You play basketball and you're really, really good, by the way, since you usually play with 5-year-olds. And whenever you play with adults, they remind you how awful of a basketball player you are. But you assume yourself to be really good, whether it's writing, drawing, being like me, assuming yourself to be like a Socrates, doesn't really matter. And then you have a dream, and the dream is, here you are, 4 feet 2 inches tall, and you happen to be white, so white men can't jump if you've seen the movie. And you're at the very center stage of Lakers basketball court. And you look around, and there are all these people on the bleachers, and they're rooting for you, applauding you. And in the dream, what you have is you see yourself as being LeBron James. And this is what they call self-fulfilling prophecy. Even though you have zero talent, even though you have no gifts in playing basketball, but because you keep assuming that you are something when in reality you're not, that the dream encourages the self-deception. There is this story that we have in the Middle East where a young man goes to a teacher and says, I want God. I want to know God. I want to reach God. I want truth. What are they? What path should I take? And After some going back and forth, the teacher looks at this kid and says, go to Safeway, buy yourself a fish. Take the fish home, wash it, clean it, put a lot of salt and a lot of garlic on the fish. Put it in the oven, bake it, 400 for 3 hours, and take it out, and then eat the whole thing. But it has to be just before you go to bed. The guy says, fine. And so he does as his master had told him. Then he goes to bed. And then he has a dream where he is running towards this pool of water. He reaches this pool of water, he sits, and he drinks water. Now, if you happen to have come from a religious culture, such dreams are profoundly symbolic. First, you have a teacher, okay? And you assume yourself to be a seeker after truth or knowledge or wisdom. Water becomes symbolic of baptism, of a new birth. And when you're drinking it, it means that you are in fact going through this baptism. And this is your rebirth, which means God is blessing you, has graced you with baptism and wisdom. So this kid, after having this dream, wakes up. He's extremely happy, inspired, excited. And he runs to his master's house and says, Master, God just touched me. I am wise now. And this old man looks at this young kid and says, so tell me what happened. I had this dream. I saw this pool of water. I ran towards it. I sat and I drank, cup after cup of water. He says, you know what happens when your body consumes a good amount of salt and garlic? He says, no, what happens? Well, your physical body runs dry, especially if you don't give it enough water. And what happens? To compensate the fact that your body wants water, but you haven't given it to him, it survives by creating a dream. Your dream is not that you're baptized. The dream is not that God has looked upon you kindly. The dream is that to remind you, get your behind up, go to the fridge or the faucet, drink some water. This is so depressing. And the final kind of a dream that most of us will never have, unless you've lived a few lifetimes, is the one that takes place in the movie The Last Samurai. That you know how to work with your 5 senses. You know what to do to make sure they don't contaminate you. They don't take spaces in your interior that you want those spaces to remain empty because they're only reserved for deities, for gods.